In this session, we come to the end of the 19th chapter of John, and we come to the major section of the crucifixion story. This week, we're looking at the whole rest of this chapter, but I want to begin just at the end of the 16th verse and read all the way to the 30th verse with you. The soldiers took Jesus prisoner. Carrying his cross by himself, he went out to a place called Skull Place, in Aramaic Golgotha. That's where they crucified him, and two others with him, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a public notice written and posted on the cross. It read, "Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read the sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. Therefore the Jewish chief priests complained to Pilate, "Don't write the King of the Jews, but this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I've written, I've written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and his sandals and divided them into 4 shares, one for each soldier. His shirt was seamless, woven as one piece from the top to the bottom. They said to each other, "Let's not tear it. Let's cast lots to see who will get it." This was to fulfill the scripture. They divided my clothes among themselves, and they cast lots for my clothing. That's what the soldiers did. Jesus' mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene stood near the cross. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. After this, knowing that everything was already completed in order to fulfill the scripture, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was nearby. So the soldiers soaked a sponge in it, placed it on a hyssop branch, and held it up to his lips. When he had received the sour wine, Jesus said, "It is completed." And bowing his head, he gave up his life. A pastor friend of mine tells a story about being in a jewelry store, and a woman came in as he was looking at the counter and said to the attendant, I'd like to buy a necklace. I think I'd really like to get a cross." And the jewelry attendant said, do you want an empty one, or do you want one of these crucifixes? And she said, "No, I don't think I want the one with the little man on it. I want an empty one." He got tickled at her saying the one with the little man on it. For when we come to this text, we're reminded that somehow or another at the center of the gospel is the man hanging on the cross, Jesus. In fact, I find it interesting that in John's telling of this story, as he talks about Jesus hanging in verse 18 between the two that were crucified with him, that he says, "But Jesus was in the middle." In this text, Jesus is in the center of it all. If you keep reading through the text, there's all sorts of people at the cross, but for us, especially those of us who believe, Jesus is always in the middle of it all. There are several groups of people that we see at work in the crucifixion narrative. It's, on the one hand, you have the soldiers, 4 of them, bartering for the clothing of Jesus, which was probably a common practice, that they would take the clothing of the one who was crucified, and part of being paid for being an executioner was to get to take their belongings home. We see those 4, though, contrasted with these 4 faithful disciples, 3 women and John, who are there before the cross, experiencing the loss of their loved one. And so as we think about what is Jesus in the middle of, first of all, we think about a community of people who are trying to do their very best, who are faithful, who stay with Jesus till the very end, but their faithfulness does not exempt them from the pain of loss, from the pain of suffering, from the pain of death. No matter who we are, how long we've been a believer, no matter how faithful we are, none of that exempts us from from the pain that we oftentimes endure in life. And yet, even there, Jesus is in the middle of it, caring for his mother, caring for his friends. He's in the middle. In this narrative, we see a whole bunch of people plotting, people who are conspiring together to bring about the death of this one who brought them trouble. And so we see in this story the embodiment of our own sinfulness, our own ugliness, our violence, our rejection of God's revelation. We see our sinfulness in that. And yet part of the message is that even there, even in the messiness of sin and rejection, even there, Christ is in the middle of our sinfulness. This one who speaks grace and forgiveness and peace is there in the middle of our sin. We see the principalities and powers. We see Pilate and soldiers, and part of the crucifixion has to do with being able to remind people who are on the bottom that they have no power. John doesn't really tell us much about the two that Jesus is crucified with. We have to pick that up from some of the other Gospels, but it's not an uncommon practice for Rome to crucify people who rebel against the powers, rebel against their authority. And so you take them and you hang them along the road. John tells us lots of people went by and saw Jesus and these people hanging there and saw the sign above his head. And lots of people saw that, and the Romans wanted them to see that. And John even seems to make clear that his clothing is gone. This is shame. This is a way of hanging those who fought against the system. This is a way of saying, if you want to rebel, this is what happens to you. And yet we see the principalities and powers conspiring, and yet here is Jesus the King in the midst of these entities vying for power. We see Jesus in the middle of those who've been rejected, those who've been abused. So on the one hand, we see, if you will, the victimizer, the abuser, but we also see Jesus standing with those who've been hurt. And so when we sense ourselves having been hurt by others, being victims of the sin of others, we come to this text to be reminded that if you want to know where God is, Jesus is in the middle of that. He's in the center of that. He is one who identifies with our brokenness and our abuse. I also find this text interesting around the conversation about the sign above his head. And John tells us it comes in 3 languages, so all the world can see it. The Jewish leaders don't want Pilate to put King of the Jews above Jesus' head. They want him to say, he said that he was King of the Jews. But Pilate leaves it there as a way, again, of reminding that this group of people, this Jewish group of people, they are nobodies, if you will, to Pilate. They are somebody to God, but they are nobodies to the world. So that one of the other groups of people I think we see at the cross are not just victimizers and victims, not just principalities and powers, not just the community trying to be faithful, but we also see a group of people who just seem to be always left on the outside with really no one to blame, just dealing with the broken stuff of life, what it means to be a person who feels left out. And again, if we want to know where Jesus is, he's right in the middle, sharing in that identity. John wants to make it really clear that all of these things that Jesus goes through in one way or another fulfill Scripture. So another way of saying that is all of this stuff that Jesus is doing is right at the center of who God is. And so as we look at the faithful community struggling, as we look at victims and victimizers, as we look at principalities and powers, as we look at those who just seem to be on the other side of life, we find that in Jesus, God is there in the middle of it all. As one of my theologian friends says, when Jesus cries out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" we are reminded in that cry that God, in the form of Jesus, goes to the place of God forsakenness, that he is in the middle of all of that. I'd love for you to have conversation tonight about what the cross means to you. If you are a victimizer, the cross means forgiveness. If you're a victim, the cross means hope. And if we are the left out ones, it means that God is with us and we are not left out. If we're the struggling community of faith trying to make it, the cross reminds us that He is with us, caring for us. No matter who we are, the cross is the center of it all. And I'd love for you to talk about then what the cross means to you. When you think about this season that we're about to enter into, as you think about Holy Week and all that we experience there, what does it mean for us to say the cross is the center? It's so odd that the Christian tradition would choose a means of execution as its primary symbol. But it's a symbol that reminds us that Christ is in the middle. And so I'd love for you to talk tonight about what it means for Christ to be in the middle of your life, in all of its messiness and all of its struggle and all of its power and vying for power and all of its sinfulness. What does it mean for us to continue to say the cross is the center of it all? I know that you'll have a wonderful conversation about the meaningfulness, the richness, the importance of the cross, and especially what it means to you. May God bless your conversation tonight, and may He be in the middle of your conversation. Lord bless you.